Of course, this is cumulative. We all had these teams in different places. Starting off with number 10, the Cincinnati Bengals.
We spoke about Cincinnati the last show because I had them at 11. So 10 here, not too much parity. I'm not too mad at it. But when I do think about the Cincinnati Bengals, like you alluded to a little bit earlier when talking about your preseason takeaways, I am concerned about the defense. I'm concerned about their interior, especially when it comes to that rush defense, because you lose DJ Reader to the Lions. Now you're really at a huge disadvantage when it comes to that, where you already weren't a great defense last year. You were a young secondary, especially after losing Jesse Bates to the Falcons, and now he solidified himself as one of the league's best. But you're building something in the secondary. But your defensive line, outside of Trey Hendrickson, you don't have real presence to get to the quarterback. I do have my concerns about the line. Outside of that, though, this offense is going to be fun. Joe Burrow's now on a mission. God willing, he can stay healthy. That is going to be the big lookout for the Bengals this upcoming year, because now we have 2 seasons under Joe Burrow's belt where he hasn't been able to play for a full year. We have the Jamar Chase contract situation going where he's been present at practice, but this most recent practice wasn't present at all. T. Higgins now in a contract year. You lose Tyler Boyd, but you bring in Burton. You have this offensive line that you did just draft Demarius Mims. There's footage of Joe Burrow having time in the pocket, actually, for the first time in a while, but now Demarius Mims gets banged up. You're going off the star power that is this offense when ranking the Bengals so high. Winning in the National Football League is predicated off scoring points, of course, but you do also need to have the defense to pair with it. The Bengals defense, to me, is a wait and see, but of course, they have so much offensive firepower that you trust that they're still going to get the job done. So again, I have not too much issue with number 10.
Joe Burrow said at a point in time that
Bengals, bro.
as long as he is on the Bengals, their window's going to be open. And I feel the same way. You know, he's been the only quarterback that's been really successful against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. He's beaten them. He's 3-1 against them. Nah, you're not a part of the bro club.
That's okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah, you're not. But I agree with you about their defense falling off.
Trust me, I'm not mad.
Because
that was more for jokes.
Because the defense 2 years ago.
Now we get sensitive about Burrow.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Nah, you just said Tua was gonna have a better career.
So far, so good.
You can't come.
So far, so good.
Good. So far, so good.
Just led the league in yards. This guy can't stay healthy. Stay healthy, please.
In 2022, the Bengals defense were 9th on early downs. That was 32nd last year. 12th in defensive efficiency. That was 30th last year. 14th to 28th in pass defense. I think their pass rush is solid. They finished 15th in pressure rate, and the addition of Sheldon Rankins, he's a pass rush specialist, that'll be a nice boost to them. But really, what I struggle with the most is that they are counting on a lot of young players on defense to take leaps. And I think some are possible. I think Myles Murphy, it's possible. I think Dax Hill now playing corner, it's possible. But who is going to step up as a run defender? Because Sheldon Rankins, over the past 2 seasons, the Bengals have been number 1 in yards per carry, number 1 in EPA per rush when he's been on the field. That's dropped to 32nd in yards per carry and 31st in EPA rush when he's been off the field. But Luanarumo, to all the credit we give him, this is the time to prove himself once again as one of the better defensive coordinators. And what helps the Bengals is that last year they faced the number 1 toughest schedule in the NFL. This year, they faced the 6th easiest schedule in the NFL. The amount of playoff teams they faced last season was 11. In those playoff games against the playoff teams, they went 4-7 versus 5-1 against non-playoff teams. Facing 11 playoff teams last year was the most that any team has faced since the year 2000. This was an insanely difficult path for the Bengals, and they still went 9-8. And Joe Burrow was unhealthy, and after week 9, he wasn't playing a down for them again. So even with their defensive concerns, I think their offense gives them such a high floor, and with their easy schedule, I really don't see this team winning less than 9-10 games.
This team is really held up by like 3 players. It's Joe Burrow, it's Jamar Chase, and it's Trey Hendrickson. When you look at the rest of this team, it's hard to find some strong points, right? I think the secondary, you're building something there, but I don't look at it as a unit you're going to be relying on to win you games down the stretch. Of course, you could have players break out and then things could change. You mentioned about the loss of DJ Reader. That's going to be huge, but as long as you have Joe Burrow, you have to feel pretty confident about the team. I had them, I believe, at number 10 on my individual ranking, and I had them lower, I think, than the rest of the contenders. I feel like everyone in this top 10 is like a true, like, you can make a Super Bowl if things break a little bit right for you type of tier for them. But I do feel like the roster compared to those other 9 teams is lacking a bit. Joe Burrow, of course, you could put him up with damn near every quarterback in this league not named Patrick Mahomes, and shit, even when he plays Patrick Mahomes, he goes toe-to-toe with him more often than not. So it really feels like they're getting carried by their 2 superstars on offense, their 1 superstar on defense. And listen, I know you said this is time for Lou to prove himself. He's proven himself to me, so I don't have too much of a worry, but the worry becomes now you're starting to lose some personnel, right? You gave Joe Burrow that big contract. Jamar Chase has been looking for his back. T. Higgins is in a contract year. You just let go of Joe Mixon, and Zach Moss was doing fine when Jonathan Taylor was out. Chase Brown has some burst, some optimism there. But this is a team that could be one of the worst rushing attacks in the NFL. And when you have Joe Burrow, I think he's able to overcome that, but then you become a little bit more one-dimensional. So I do think the personnel is starting to take a leap down, but when you have one of the best quarterbacks in the league, when you have a top 5 dude, you have a defensive coordinator I trust, there's still a world this team can get to the Super Bowl.
So, excuse me. Where did you have them?
I had them 11.
You had them 10? 10?
Yeah, I had them 10.
So I think I'm the one that had them the lowest. I had them at about 13 because of all the things you guys alluded to. Their defense is going to be weak. I think this year you're going to see a lot of youth and a lot of bad mistakes, probably a couple, penalties, just because this team has to grow as a young defensive talent. This team has to get better. They have to produce talent, and the youth has to get better. This team primarily is going to rely on Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. We honestly don't know what we're going to get from T. Higgins. He had a rough last year. Even when Joe Burrow was hurt, he started to play a little bit better towards the end of the year. But still, this is, like you mentioned, T. Higgins on a contract year. He wants to get paid, but is he going to really step up to the plate? Jamar Chase missing a practice because of his contract situation. Offensive line is getting better, but it still is a work in progress. So this team just has a lot of question marks. And, like you mentioned, Dels, Joe Burrow is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And we have a guy of that talent. You kind of can put them a little bit higher and bank on the talent, bank on the fact that they have 2 guys at, 2 of the most important positions in the league at top 5 in their position, in Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow. But, that defense, like Drew mentioned, they have to eventually get stops. They have to eventually get to the quarterback. They have to eventually cause turnovers, stop these wide receivers. And, being as if how young and promising they can be, they still have to go out there and prove it. I think their schedule could give us a bit of a, false outlook on this team because they do have an easy schedule, so their defense could look better than what it actually is. But until they play those tougher teams, we're really not going to know.
There are 6 games where they face inexperienced quarterbacks. They play Bo Nix this year, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, Will Levis, Aiden O'Connell, or Gardner Minshew.
Will Levis could light them up.
And Bryce Young. Even if
Bryce
he
Young.
does,
That should be 5.
I didn't hear
it's a favorable.
No, I didn't
it's
hear
a
you. I
favorable
didn't hear you.
schedule.
Said Bryce Young.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I just didn't hear you. Calm down.
All right.
Yeah, I didn't hear
I
you.
stay on edge, especially when it comes to you.
No, I'm a
you
Panther
love
guy.
Panthers. That's why I
We're here.
got along
Jonathan
with
Mingo.
Jonathan Mingo, man.
Yo.
Well, we
They
didn't.
kicked Terrence Marshall off the fucking
As
depth
they
chart.
should.
Jesus Christ.
Well, we didn't mention
That was
about
your
the
guy?
Bengals. That seems like an obvious issue every year, but because they find a way to make it work, we don't talk about it much. It's
Tight
the
end?
pass blocking.
Oh, okay.
Last 3 years,
we
their
don't
pass
talk about
block win rates 30th, 27th.
We don't talk about the
We talk about
O-line?
that shit every
We
year.
haven't talked about it so far here. They have been one of the worst pass blocking offensive lines, and I don't think that they made a huge improvement. They signed Trent Brown.
Mm-hmm.
He's hurt already.
Facts.
Armarius Mims just tore his pec after a promising preseason debut. You lose Jonah Williams, who wasn't good for them anyway. And Orlando Brown Jr. has been one of the worst left tackles in the league. They signed him to big-time money. It was a mistake in the first place because
He fleeced them.
Mahomes is the best quarterback in history under pressure and pocket movement.
For sure.
That's why his sack rates are so low. Orlando Brown let up the most pressures in the league, even with Mahomes, but Mahomes didn't get sacked. With Burrow, it's a little more evident because Burrow doesn't have the pocket presence that Mahomes has. But Orlando Brown has been bad for them. And he's a locked-in starter because of the money they signed him to. So this offensive line doesn't have a clear pathway unless they draft and develop players. And their early draft picks really haven't had great returns, like Cordell Volson at guard. He's like average at best. So even with the defensive issues we've mentioned, this offensive line, even when we've seen a history of they're able to overcome it, it's still a serious problem, especially for both the pass and the rush game.
That's a